Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alundi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
Namaste, hello dear ones. Today I'm going to try a slightly difficult topic. The subject today is hummus wars, cultural erasure and food. Why is this topic a little bit difficult for me? Because I'm not an anthropologist. I'm just a human rights activist, but I am also someone who has struggled to overcome the cultural erasure of my own Jewish identity. So let's try. As we know, food is a profound aspect of culture. It reflects our geographical and historical roots. We connect to our ancestors through food, cooking what they cooked, honoring festivals with their special foods, taking pride in the gastronomic expressions of our cultural identity. So, thinking about it, I've thought of 3 ways that cultural erasure happens. Through cataclysms like genocide, through assimilation, and through cultural appropriation. As a British Jew, I've personally experienced both erasure through the Holocaust and erasure through assimilation. Erasure through the Holocaust, it really hit me when we went on Sadanand's ancestral journey and we were able to go to Mass in the church where his great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents had made their first communion, their baptism, their confirmation, and so on. It was an amazing feeling, but it was also a very sad feeling to think that I could only connect to the life ways of my Ashkenazic ancestors by visiting a Holocaust museum. I learned a lot about them in Yad Vashem. It's a catastrophe. It's so sad. But there was also the tremendous pressure to assimilate, and it was assimilation in so many ways that robbed me of many aspects of my Jewish identity. And there's a much greater pressure to assimilate if you belong to a despised minority. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in the UK. Outside of special Jewish areas like Golders Green or like the Jewish suburb where my grandparents lived, it can be scary to be openly Jewish. Despite having a Jewish name, Yudis, I was discouraged from being openly Jewish or mentioning anything about being Jewish outside the home. And so assimilation played a huge part in robbing me of my sense of roots and cultural identity. If we belong to a despised minority, we feel a pressure to assimilate and leave our compromising identity behind. So let's take a little look at each of these as it relates to food. First of all, through cataclysm. During the process of ethnic cleansing and genocide, destruction of foodways is a really important feature. We may think, first of all, of the slaughter of the bison, almost to the point of extinction. That formed a key aspect of the genocide of the Native Americans who lived on the plains here, right here where I am now, and hunted the buffalo, as the bison have come to be called. And instead of their their own life ways, their own hunting life, their nourishing meals of bison meat. They are given rotting flour and taught to make fry bread, which in its own way, paradoxically, has become part of Native American identity among the tribes of the plains here. But to this very day, we may think of the uprooting of olive trees in occupied Palestine. When I see it, I always wonder which Torah these people have been reading, because my Torah says that we mustn't harm trees, that our war is not with trees. That's what my book of Deuteronomy that I read said. That's what I memorized. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's not funny. Uprooting all these olive trees in order to destroy the traditional life ways of the Palestinian people by destroying that which provides them with oil, with nourishment, with sustenance. So I want to look very briefly at cultural erasure through assimilation and cultural appropriation using the lens of Humus, or perhaps we should really say Humus tahina. Growing up in a small town in England in the 1950s, and then in a provincial town in the 60s, I was mainly familiar with a standard working class British diet. The foods my mother's ancestors cooked: Yorkshire pudding, apple crumble, rhubarb pie, and so on. Those foods would have been on every table in our small town. But our table also included foods that were not eaten in other households in Melton Mowbray. We always had matzoh on our table. We had challa. It had been hard to find out how to buy it. My mum, who was used to shopping in London, went to the bakery in Melton and asked for challah and was met with blank stares. She described it and finally, "Oh, you mean Jew's bread?" Jew's bread. We were able to get it. We had sesame halvah, and my mum learned to make amazing latkes. These foods would not have been eaten in other households. There was no other Jewish family in my small town. These foods were introduced by my father and by my mother's good wife efforts of learning from her mother-in-law how to cook the foods her husband liked to have. And at Granny's house, we enjoyed kosher dill pickles, which we called wallies, pickled herring, matzoh ball soup, and kugel. Granny prepared an array of Eastern European Jewish foods, authentic Jewish food, foods of our ancestors, none of which included hummus. In fact, Mum, Dad, and I first tasted hummus tahina in East Jerusalem, where it was served for breakfast. We tasted it, we loved it, it was amazing, it was the best breakfast. And when we got home, Dad learned to make hummus tahina and started making it for his breakfast. So after I had graduated med school and then tried my vocation in a Cistercian abbey, my twisty, windy path, I started the journey of trying to shake off my own experience of cultural erasure by living with my Jewish grandparents and studying Hebrew. Not content with which, I did also study Arabic as well. You should know that. So we were all friends in the Hebrew class. I was only able to study Arabic in language lab. That's why it didn't go as well. I studied Hebrew in Hebrew class, and one day after class someone said, "Let's go out to the Israeli restaurant. There's an Israeli restaurant." So we all went out to the restaurant and we settled down to our hummus and our baba ganoush and our falafels and everything. I remember sitting in a window booth, and then we realized it wasn't an Israeli restaurant. It was, in fact, An Arab restaurant, I don't remember. It's decades back, whether it was Palestinian, Lebanese, which kind of Arab restaurant it was. But I saw my friends getting into their Jewish trauma thing and feeling afraid and what are we doing? We've come to an Arab restaurant. This is not safe, etc. It's an experience that I won't forget. So let's talk a little bit about the history of hummus. What is hummus? Where does it come from? Hummus, literally the word hummus means chickpeas. That's why I said we really should be calling it hummus tahina, like they call it in East Jerusalem, because it's a recipe. It's not just chickpeas. And it obviously is ancient because chickpeas have been being grown in the Middle East from time immemorial. So have sesame seeds. And hummus tahina includes both of those. So where did this recipe come from? There is a cookbook from 13th century Cairo, Kitab Wasfalatima al-Mutada, the description of familiar food. Hummus kasa, which is chickpeas mashed with vinegar. I don't think I'd like that, but it didn't have tahina, I'm pretty sure. There was vinegar, there was no lemon, there was no garlic. Maybe there was hummus and tahina. I think that's right. Then there was a Syrian cookbook, Kitab al-Wusla Habib, also from the 13th century. And that's a puree of chickpeas and lemons. They didn't have all the ingredients that I typically put in when I make hummus, which is chickpeas, tahini, garlic, lemon, and I also always put olive oil. So the first written record of a recipe like what I make regularly for hummus comes from the 18th century from Damascus in beloved today Syria. It seems to think it's a new recipe, but it probably wasn't really a new recipe. It probably took a while to come in. So, yes, hummus has been made throughout the Arab world. It's a recipe made from the foods that people eat and grow and have to hand in the Arab world. Chickpeas, sesame seeds, then there's lemon, of course olive oil, and there's garlic. So, two things have happened to hummus. The first is cultural appropriation. So, to quote Rafi Groslich in a really amazing article, The Rise and Demise of Ashkenazi Cuisine in Israel-Palestine, he points out that early Zionist settlers sought to reconnect to their perceived homeland and heritage, and regarded Arab, Palestinian, and Bedouin traditions as related to or resembling of those of the Hebrews of antiquity. This has become so much so that were Granny to have gone to Israel, which she never actually did, she would not have found any of her familiar favorites in restaurants in Israel. Despite Ashkenazic Jews being the majority in Israel, they were stripped of their foodways, as Ashkenazic Jews were also stripped by Israel of their language, Yiddish, and had instead to speak Hebrew, which had never in memory been a vernacular language. People used to speak Aramaic, just like people spoke Prakrit and not Sanskrit. And the Hebrew wasn't even to be pronounced in the way that we Ashkenazim had always pronounced it. It was to be pronounced in a more pure way, which, okay, I kind of like that pure pronunciation, but that's kind of beside the point. It was actually a cultural erasure by Israel of Ashkenazic culture, even though Ashkenazi were the majority of people that were Zionists and went to start the country of Israel. They were then encouraged to eat the local foods and make the recipes that surely our ancestors had made, these Arabic foods, and the somewhat constructed identity Mizrahi Jews, which are all the different kinds of Jews from the different parts of the Arab world and North Africa who spoke Arabic, were integrated into the society of those countries. The foods that they made started to be seen as Israeli foods. Now, falafel is a national food of Israel. Now, hummus, actually hummus tahina, and baba ganoush, and all of the familiar Arabic foods have become Israeli foods, which is why I quoted that funny but bizarre experience when we went out in London for a quote-unquote Israeli meal, and everyone got weird, very weird. So that is a profound cultural appropriation. It is something that we see among colonizers. We go to a place, colonize the place, and appropriate all that is good that we find there and say that it is ours. These are no longer your recipes, they are now Israeli recipes. They are no longer Palestinian or Arab recipes, they belong to Israel. This is no longer a Palestinian breakfast, an Arab breakfast, it's the Israeli breakfast. So that's one of the things that's happened to hummus. But the other thing that's happened to hummus is a horrible experience of assimilation. Hummus has been assimilated into supermarket culture. You can buy your hummus at Tesco's if you're in the UK, or at Safeway, or at King Soopers if you're here. You can buy hummus everywhere, but it isn't made like the real hummus, and it's stripped of its Arab identity. It is just a dip that you can have anywhere and everywhere with anything and everything. You can have it with corn chips. Let's just appropriate two cultures at once, shall we? It's stripped of its identity as an Arab food, as the same things happen with guacamole and many of the Aztec foods. The same things happen to many people's foods. They have been assimilated in this melting pot and lost their real cultural roots, and often presented as not as authentic recipes. So, how can we fight cultural appropriation with food? So I would say the first thing that I've come to learn to work with is call it what it is. Don't call it Israeli food if you actually think it's Arab food. Don't call it American food if it's Aztec food, and so on. Call it what it is. Respect, honor. It's just like how we're supposed to do the land recognition of the land that we're on, that we recognize that we're on the unceded territories and so on. We should do that with the food too. We should recognize the culture that bestowed this food upon us. Second, let's use authentic recipes, authentic ingredients. That's going to give you a trip not to the supermarket, but to local market. So we're going to get our ingredients for the way that I make hummus from Salem at the quote-unquote Mediterranean market. That's another whole discussion, why Middle Eastern markets have been Mediterraneanized to sound less scary. He's really Libyan. He makes great falafels. He makes great hummus, but I don't go there to buy pre-made hummus, but I go there to make sure I have the sumac, to make sure that I have some good olive oil, to make sure that I have the za'atar, to decorate my hummus in the correct manner and make it with just the right ingredients, using authentic recipes, authentic ingredients that we buy from authentic people. So this is also still a little confusing to me because there's something pretty pan-Arab about hummus. So it kind of depends. What I'm going to call the meal is going to depend on what else I'm going to serve with it. I might say this is a Lebanese meal if I'm going to make the hummus and the baba ganoush and what I would see as a traditional Lebanese red lentil soup. Then I might think that I'm making a Lebanese meal. I oftentimes made a Lebanese meal on my birthday, actually. I might call it a Syrian meal if I'm looking up and making sure that the recipes I'm preparing are from Syrian families who've put them on their blogs. I might call it a Palestinian meal if the things I have alongside the pretty pan-Arab hummus are recipes that I have found on the internet that come from Palestinian family. So I don't know if we're going to get all the same weeds in our garden this year because of the drought, but we normally get purslane in our garden, and searching around for what best to make with purslane, I did find a Palestinian food blog, and I did find a Palestinian recipe where you make a soup or a stew that uses the purslane, uses the red lentils, uses chickpeas, uses authentic spices that Palestinian people use. So then when we're serving that particular soup, along with the hummus, baba ganoush, labneh, I also make the traditional cheese that you make by home-making yogurt and hanging it. When I serve the foods with a Palestinian flair, I'm going to call it a Palestinian meal. And I'm going to do that featuring, depending on the solidarity that I want to feel at a particular time. So during all those years of horrors that were going on in Syria, I would really like to make Syrian meals, take pictures of it to send to Farhad, my Syrian friend. Hey, look, we just had Syrian food, but you eat it for breakfast, and we eat it for supper, which, by the way, you're having breakfast the next morning anyway when we're eating our supper, so within that 9-hour time difference, I think it is. So It's a Syrian meal, and I'm eating it in solidarity with my beloved Syrian people. And so lately, especially since October the 7th and the genocide started, I'm really liking to make my Palestinian meal. I have the whole menu saved on my computer, the Palestinian meal that I figured out how to make. If you're listening to this and you're Palestinian, send me any vegetarian recipes you have. I won't be able to make the meat-based recipes. And by the way, I'll cut out the onions. Sorry about that. We just can't eat them. But I'll proudly serve that Palestinian meal. I'll invite my friends for a Palestinian meal because that is spreading that feeling that we are I'm helping them to be with me to fight cultural erasure by eating Palestinian food, which is actually not Israeli food. I mean, it's not Jewish food. Well, it is Jewish food in the sense that Jews in Arab countries who lived with Arab people definitely were making and eating those foods, but my ancestors had never heard of them. I doubt my ancestors knew what a chickpea was. My ancestors made the food that grew in Eastern Europe, my Jewish ancestors, I mean. Granny would have been disappointed with her food had she in fact gone to Israel. So this can be a very simple way of fighting cultural erasure. Call the food what it is. Use authentic recipes and ingredients. Do your level best, shop in the right places, make the real things, and then make it big, make it loud, invite your friends. Invite your friends for a Palestinian meal. Spread the word that there are a real people and a real culture, because we know that in order to genocide a people, we have to turn them from humans to cockroaches. We know this happened in the Holocaust. We know this is happening now. Palestinians are now the ones cast as much less than human, just as the Jews in Eastern Europe and all over Europe in their time were cast as much less than human, as some kind of pest upon the human race. With pride, invite your friends for a Palestinian meal. Share the pride, share the blessings of ancient cultures and a people that really and truly exist, and that we want to see that people flourish for the future. Namaste.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Trayambakam yajamahe sugandhim pushtivardanam urvarukamiva bandanam mrityormukshiyamam